Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Jackson Vance woke up to the sound of his door alarm blaring. Groggy, he rubbed his face and checked the time. 3:47 a.m. Who the hell comes knocking at this hour? He muttered. With a sigh, he grabbed a shirt off the floor, threw it on, and stumbled toward the door of his small but expensive apartment in Orion Station, a high-end trade hub floating near the border of human and alien space. The moment he pressed the panel, the door whooshed open, and his life changed forever. Standing in the doorway was the most intimidating figure he had ever seen. Clad in black and silver battle armor, the tall warrior radiated authority. A long red cloak draped over one shoulder, and the air around him carried an electric tension, as if a storm had just arrived at his doorstep. Behind the warrior, two other armored figures flanked her, standing at rigid attention. Their faces were unreadable, but their posture alone told Jackson that this wasn't a social visit. The leader took a step forward, towering over him. Jackson Vance. The voice was firm, rich, and unmistakably female. Jackson blinked, still half asleep. "Yeah, that's me. Who's asking?" The woman reached into a metal case and pulled out a glowing holographic scroll. With a flick of her wrist, it activated, displaying elegant alien script alongside an official human trade seal. "You are hereby claimed under the sacred rights of life bond. The inheritance of your late uncle, Dorian Vance, has been transferred to you. That includes all assets, titles, and obligations, including me. Now, I am all yours." Jackson's brain stalled. He stared at the glowing document, then at the warrior woman, then back at the document. His lips parted slightly, as if words would come out, but none did. Finally, he blinked. I think there's been a mistake." The warrior's expression did not change. "There is no mistake. You are my mate now. It is done." Jackson let out a nervous chuckle and rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I don't know what kind of weird alien prank this is, but I'm pretty sure people don't just inherit wives." One of the armored guards growled. Jackson felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes drilling into him, and for the first time, he sensed how dangerous the situation was. These people weren't here to negotiate. The woman crossed her arms, her patience clearly thinning. "Your uncle agreed to this bond before his passing. You are now the rightful heir to his holdings, his alliances, and his duty to my house. Refusing would be unwise." Jackson exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his messy dark hair. "Okay, let's slow down here. I don't even know your name." The warrior tilted her chin slightly. "I am Lady Syraxa Vordran, High Warden of the Crimson Blade." Jackson blinked again. That name was familiar. His uncle had mentioned something about a powerful house tied to a warrior empire, but he had mostly tuned out those parts of the old man's ramblings. Now, standing in front of Syraxa, he wished he had paid more attention. "Right," he said slowly. "Okay, so let's say this isn't some ridiculous joke. What happens if I say no?" Syraxa's eyes narrowed. "Then you reject my house. My honor is insulted. My people will see it as an act of war." Jackson coughed. "War? That escalated fast." Syraxa took another step forward, now inches from his face. "This bond is not a mere contract. It is a sacred oath. You are my mate. You will act as such, or you will face the consequences." Jackson swallowed. This was bad. Really bad. Then, as if the universe hadn't tormented him enough, his apartment's AI chimed in with a bright, cheery voice. "Congratulations, Jackson Vance. Your legal records have been updated. Welcome to married life." Jackson groaned. He was so screwed. Jackson Vance sat on his couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Across from him, Lady Syraxa Vordran stood tall, arms crossed, watching him like a hawk. She had barged into his life just minutes ago, declaring him her life-bound mate and tying his fate to a powerful alien empire. Now, as his apartment's AI cheerfully announced his new marital status, Jackson tried to process what had just happened. "This is crazy," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "I didn't agree to this. My uncle did, and he's dead. So shouldn't that cancel the deal?" Syrax's eyes flashed with something close to irritation. "His word is eternal. A Vance does not dishonor a pact." Well, this Vance had no idea he was getting married. Jackson shot back. One of Syrax's guards took a step forward, their heavy armor clanking. Jackson flinched, raising his hands. All right, let's not stab the new husband just yet." Syraxa exhaled sharply and sat down across from him. The movement was calculated, controlled, like a predator deciding whether to strike or wait. "You seem unwilling," she observed. "You think?" Jackson laughed, though there was no humor in it. "I was having a perfectly normal life yesterday. Now I'm married to a warrior princess who talks about honor and war like it's breakfast conversation." Syraxa tilted her head slightly. "Would you rather I leave?" Jackson hesitated. That was the logical choice, right? If she walked out that door, he could pretend none of this happened. He could go back to his simple, safe life. No battles, no alien politics, no terrifyingly beautiful warrior staring at him like she could break him in half. But then he remembered what she had said. Rejecting her would mean war. "Okay," he said, sighing. "Say I don't want to be responsible for intergalactic conflict. What exactly does this life bond mean?" Syraxa leaned forward slightly. "It means we are bound in duty. My people will see you as my equal. You will share my wealth, my titles, my battles, and in return I will stand at your side, always." Jackson frowned. "Always? As in forever?" Syraxa didn't blink. "Until death." Jackson leaned back, exhaling loudly. "Great. No pressure or anything." Syraxa studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You do not trust me. Gee, I wonder why." He gave her a half-smile. "It's not every day a guy finds out he's married to someone who could probably throw him across the room." "You think me unfit?" There was an edge in her voice. Jackson's eyes widened. "What? No, that's not what Look, He groaned. "I don't know how to do this." Syraxa was silent for a moment, then said, "Neither do I." That made Jackson pause. He had expected arrogance, maybe even anger, but not honesty. "You don't?" he asked carefully. Syraxa shook her head. "This was not my choice either. But I honor my oaths, and I will honor you, if you prove worthy." Jackson scoffed. "Oh great, a test. What do I have to do? Slay a beast? Win a duel? Lift a giant boulder over my head?" Syraxa's lips twitched, almost like she was holding back a smirk. "You must come with me. Meet my people, stand among warriors. Show them that you are not weak." Jackson ran a hand down his face. "So, a trial by fire. Fantastic. It is the only way," Syraxa said. Jackson studied her. Despite the steel in her voice, there was something else in her eyes, something uncertain. She was used to warriors, not smooth-talking humans like him. This was as new for her as it was for him, and strangely, that made him feel a little less alone. With a deep breath, Jackson pushed himself up from the couch. "All right, Syraxa, if I'm really stuck with this whole life bond thing, let's do it your way." Syraxa stood as well, nodding in approval. "You will not regret this, Jackson Vance." Somehow, he doubted that. Jackson Vance stood at the entrance of the massive starship, staring at the towering structure before him. Its sleek black hull gleamed under the station's artificial lights, etched with ancient symbols he couldn't begin to understand. The moment felt heavy, like stepping into a world where he didn't belong. Beside him, Lady Syraxa Vordran watched him closely, her arms crossed. She had barely spoken since their agreement back in his apartment. Now, she simply gestured toward the ship. "Come," she said. Jackson exhaled. What had he gotten himself into? With reluctant steps, he followed her up the ramp, passing through the ship's towering entrance. The moment he stepped inside, all eyes turned to him. The warriors of House Vordran stood in perfect formation, their gleaming armor reflecting the dim red lighting of the chamber. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to open disapproval. Jackson cleared his throat. Hey." The warriors remained silent. Syraxa stepped forward, her voice sharp. "This is Jackson Vance. By the will of our ancestors, he is my lifebound mate. You will show him the honor he deserves." A heavy silence followed. Jackson shifted awkwardly, feeling the weight of 100 judging stares. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't built for this kind of intensity. Then, a deep voice rumbled from the front row. "This is the one you chose." Jackson turned toward the speaker. A massive warrior stepped forward, his dark red cape flowing behind him. His face was lined with battle scars, his eyes filled with doubt. Syraxa squared her shoulders. He was chosen by fate. The bond was sealed. The warrior's gaze swept over Jackson, unimpressed. "He looks weak." Jackson groaned internally. Of course, this was how it was going to go. "Okay," he muttered, stepping forward. "Let's get one thing straight. I didn't choose this either. But here I am. So unless there's a refund policy on intergalactic marriages, we're gonna have to deal with it." A few warriors exchanged glances. Someone chuckled under their breath. Syraxa's lips twitched, but she remained composed. "Jackson will prove himself. There will be a trial." Jackson snapped his head toward her. What now?" The scared warrior smirked. "A trial of worthiness. If he fails, he cannot claim his place by your side." Jackson raised a hand. "Wait, hold on. What happens if I fail?" Syraxa didn't look at him as she answered. "Then you will no longer be bound to me." Jackson blinked. That sounded good, right? He could walk away from this whole mess. No war. No terrifying warriors judging him. No impossible expectations. But as he glanced at Syraxa, something in his chest tightened. She had defended him, even when her people doubted him. She could have dismissed him as weak, but she hadn't. Instead, she had given him a chance. And damn it, Jackson Vance wasn't the kind of guy who backed down from a challenge. With a slow exhale, he turned to the scared warrior. "Fine. What's the trial?" The warrior's grin widened. "A test of strength, endurance, and courage. If you can last 3 rounds against a chosen opponent, you pass." Jackson frowned. "Define last." The warrior cracked his knuckles. "You survive." Jackson stared. Oh, he was so screwed. Jackson Vance stood in the middle of the training arena, rolling his shoulders as he tried not to look nervous. Around him, dozens of alien warriors watched from the edges, their sharp eyes filled with curiosity and amusement. The air was thick with tension. The walls of the arena gleamed with alien symbols, glowing faintly under the artificial lighting. Jackson had no idea what they meant, but he figured they were bad news for him. Across from him stood his opponent. The warrior was massive, easily a foot taller than Jackson, with broad shoulders and a thick battle-scarred frame. His armor gleamed, and his heavy boots thudded against the ground as he stepped forward. Syraxa stood to the side, arms crossed. She gave Jackson a single nod. "Prove yourself." "Prove myself," Jackson thought bitterly. Against that, the scared warrior, who had introduced himself as Valor, cracked his knuckles. "We begin when the gong sounds. Try to stay conscious, little human." Jackson forced a grin. No promises. A deep gong rang through the chamber. Valor lunged. Jackson barely had time to react before a massive fist swung toward his face. He ducked, just in time, but the force of the punch sent a gust of wind past his ear. He stumbled back, eyes wide. Whoa, let's talk about this," Jackson called. Valor did not seem interested in talking. The warrior came at him again, his movements fast for someone so large. Jackson barely dodged a second swing, but this time he wasn't fast enough. Valor's shoulder rammed into him, sending him flying backward. He hit the ground hard, skidding across the smooth floor. A chorus of chuckles rose from the watching warriors. Jackson groaned. That hurt. He pushed himself up onto his elbows. Okay, that was unpleasant. Valor smirked. You are weak. Jackson wiped a bit of blood from his lip and grinned. Yeah, well, I've been told that before. Valor charged again. But this time, Jackson was ready. Instead of running, he sidestepped at the last second. Valor's momentum carried him forward, and straight into a stone pillar. The impact shook the arena. The warriors watching stiffened. Jackson's grin widened. Ha! Not so fun when you hit something bigger than me, huh? Valor growled and turned back, eyes burning with fury. Jackson's grin faltered. Oh! The next punch came faster than Jackson could react. It caught him in the stomach, knocking the air from his lungs. He doubled over, gasping, as pain exploded through his body. Valor grabbed him by the collar and lifted him off the ground. The arena went silent. Jackson coughed, trying to catch his breath. Okay, you made your point. Strong warrior, very impressive. Can we call it a day? Valor didn't answer. He just pulled back a fist for the final blow. But before it could land, enough. Syrax's voice cut through the arena like a blade. Valor froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward her. Syrax's gaze was cold. He has lasted 3 rounds. The trial is complete. Jackson, still dangling in the air, managed a weak thumbs up. Yeah, totally. Meant to do that. With a reluctant grunt, Valor dropped him. Jackson hit the ground with a thud, groaning as he rolled onto his back. The warriors whispered among themselves. Some looked unimpressed. Others seemed almost amused. Syraxa stepped forward and looked down at him. You are not strong, she said simply. Jackson let out a dry laugh. Wow. Thanks. But, she continued, you are not a coward. And you are clever. Jackson blinked up at her. Was that approval? Syraxa extended a hand. Jackson hesitated for a moment before taking it. Her grip was firm as she pulled him up. You have earned the right to stand beside me, she said. Jackson rubbed his sore ribs. Great. Can I do that while sitting down? Syraxa's lips twitched slightly. Come. Your trials are far from over. Jackson sighed. Of course they were. Jackson Vance winced as he pressed a cold cloth against his ribs. Every inch of his body ached, a painful reminder that alien warriors did not believe in taking it easy. The trial was over, but his problems were far from it. He sat on the edge of a sleek metal bench in what he assumed was Syraxa's private quarters aboard the warship. The room was minimalist but elegant, with dark metallic walls and a single glowing emblem etched into the floor, probably some warrior code or family crest. Jackson was too tired to care. Syraxa stood nearby, arms crossed as she studied him. Her expression was unreadable. You fought poorly, she finally said. Jackson groaned. Thanks for that. Really needed to hear it. But, Syraxa hesitated. You endured. Jackson blinked. He wasn't expecting that. Yeah, well, he muttered, shifting uncomfortably. I figured if I was gonna get beaten up, I might as well make a show of it. Syraxa tilted her head slightly, as if examining him in a new light. You are unlike any mate I could have imagined. Jackson let out a tired chuckle. Yeah, well, I never imagined marrying into an alien warrior clan, so I guess we're even. A silence settled between them. It wasn't exactly awkward, but it was something. Jackson decided to break it. So, he said, leaning back against the wall, now that I've passed your little trial of pain and humiliation, what happens next? Do I get a trophy? A survived Valor t-shirt? Syraxa didn't smile, but her eyes flickered with something, amusement. You will be presented before the High Council, she said. They will judge whether you are truly worthy of the bond. Jackson blinked. Wait. I still have to be judged. What was the point of almost getting my ribs crushed? Siraxa exhaled, as if he was the one being difficult. The trial proved your resilience, but the council does not care only for strength. They will test your mind. Jackson groaned. Great, so first I get punched, and now I have to sit through an alien interview. Siraxa ignored his sarcasm. The council will ask questions. They will attempt to uncover weaknesses, both in you and in our bond. Jackson hesitated. Weaknesses in their bond. A strange feeling settled in his chest. I guess that means we need to be on the same page, he said. Siraxa nodded. Yes, they will expect us to act as one. Jackson ran a hand through his hair. So, maybe we should talk. Actually get to know each other before they start grilling me like an unprepared student. Siraxa studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she sat down across from him. Very well, she said. Ask what you will. Jackson thought for a moment, then smirked. All right, let's start with the important stuff. What's your favorite food? Siraxa raised an eyebrow. Food. Yeah, Jackson said, leaning forward. The thing we eat so we don't die. Favorite meal. Siraxa considered this, then said, fire-roasted draken meat, seasoned with Kaler spice. Jackson had no idea what that was, but he nodded seriously. Sounds intense. It is, Siraxa said. And yours? Jackson grinned. Pizza. Siraxa frowned slightly. I do not know this word. Jackson gasped in mock horror. That's tragic. Okay, if I survive all this, I'm introducing you to pizza. Siraxa shook her head slightly, but there was a hint of amusement in her expression. For the first time since this insanity began, Jackson felt like they weren't just reluctant partners thrown into a mess. For the first time, it felt like they were actually talking. Jackson adjusted the stiff ceremonial tunic they had given him, trying not to fidget as he stood outside the massive doors of the High Council chamber. The fabric was dark with silver accents, a clear attempt to make him look more worthy. He appreciated the effort, but no fancy outfit could change the fact that he was just a guy from Earth, about to face a room full of powerful alien leaders who could decide his fate. Siraxa stood beside him, calm as ever. You are nervous, she observed. Jackson scoffed. Of course I'm nervous. This is like walking into a job interview where, if I mess up, I get thrown out of an airlock. Siraxa arched an eyebrow. The council does not throw people out of airlocks. Jackson exhaled in relief. Good. They execute them with plasma blades instead. Jackson stared. Siraxa let the silence hang for a moment before the faintest smirk appeared on her lips. Jackson let out a nervous laugh. Oh, great. You're developing a sense of humor. Just what I needed. Before Siraxa could reply, the massive doors creaked open, revealing a grand hall inside. The chamber was vast, lined with towering pillars inscribed with golden symbols. At the far end, seated in an elegant semicircle, were the members of the High Council, an imposing group of warriors, scholars, and strategists. Their armor and robes gleamed under the chamber's soft lighting, and their piercing gazes immediately locked onto Jackson. He straightened his shoulders. Showtime. Siraxa led the way, walking with purpose. Jackson followed, doing his best not to look like a nervous wreck. As they reached the center of the hall, an older council member with deep-set eyes and silver markings on his forehead spoke. Jackson Vance, the elder intoned. You stand before us as an outsider, bonded to one of our own. We will determine if you are worthy of this honor. Jackson nodded, resisting the urge to gulp. Understood. A second council member, a stern-looking woman in deep blue robes, leaned forward. What do you offer to House Vordrin? What skills, what strengths make you fit to stand beside Lady Siraxa? Jackson opened his mouth, then hesitated. Good question. Fighting? Not really. Political strategy? Not his thing. Strength? Unless sarcasm counted, he was out of luck. He glanced at Siraxa. Her expression was unreadable, but he knew she was watching closely. Then it hit him. "Look," Jackson began, straightening up. "I know I don't fit your usual definition of strong. I'm not a warrior, and I'll never be as tough as the people in this room." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but Jackson kept going. "But I am resourceful." He gestured toward Syraxa. "I survived the trial against Valor, not because I was stronger, but because I used my head. I know how to think on my feet, adapt, and find solutions." The council members exchanged glances. Jackson took a breath and continued. "And another thing, I respect your culture. I may not understand all of it yet, but I'm willing to learn. Syraxa and I didn't choose this bond, but now that it's here, I'm not running away. I'll stand by her." Silence followed. Then the silver-marked elder leaned forward. "You speak boldly, but words mean little without action. Would you be willing to prove your devotion?" Jackson froze. Define prove." A slow smile formed on the elder's lips. "You shall undertake the oath of unity, a sacred tradition. If you pass, the bond will be recognized by all." Jackson sighed. "Yeah, that sounds like something that's gonna hurt, doesn't it?" Syraxa finally spoke, her voice calm. "It will not kill you," she said. Jackson groaned. "That's not as reassuring as you think it is." The council elder gestured. "The trial begins at dawn." Jackson sighed. "Of course it does." Jackson stared at the ceremonial blade placed before him. It was curved, black as night, and humming with a faint, eerie energy. He had no idea how it worked, but he was pretty sure it wasn't just for decoration. Across the sacred hall, the High Council watched in silence. Their expressions were unreadable, but the weight of their judgment hung heavy in the air. The oath of unity was no joke. Jackson swallowed hard. "So, just to be clear, no one is gonna stab me, right?" Syraxa, standing beside him, tilted her head. "Not unless you fail." Jackson grimaced. "Not the answer I was hoping for." The silver-marked elder from before rose from his seat. "The oath of unity is an ancient rite. It requires a test of will, trust, and devotion." His piercing gaze locked onto Jackson. "Do you accept?" Jackson exhaled slowly. Backing out wasn't an option. "Yeah," he said. "Let's do this." The elder nodded and raised his hand. A low hum filled the chamber as the blade on the altar levitated into the air. Jackson's eyes widened. "Oh, cool. Floating knife. That's not terrifying at all." Syraxa did not react. She merely stepped forward, holding out her hand. The blade turned in the air and moved toward her, settling just above her palm. "By ancient tradition," the elder declared, "the bond shall be tested. If the human is worthy, the blade shall pass between them both and leave them unharmed." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, what?" Syraxa turned to him, her expression calm. "Do not move." "Why do people always say that right before something bad happens?" Jackson muttered. The blade rose again, hovering between them. The energy around it intensified, crackling like lightning in the air. Jackson could hear his own heartbeat. Then, without warning, the blade shot forward. His first instinct was to dodge, but he forced himself to stand still. The weapon sliced through the air, heading straight for his chest. And then, at the very last second, it passed through him. Jackson braced for pain. But nothing. No wound. No blood. He turned his head and saw that the blade had also passed through Syraxa. It floated behind them now, its energy slowly fading. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Jackson blinked. Am I dead?" Syraxa exhaled, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of relief in her expression. "No," she said. "You passed." Jackson let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Oh, thank everything." The elder rose again, his expression now pleased. "The blade has judged your bond strong. Jackson Vance, you are now recognized as Syraxa's mate in the eyes of the council." A murmur of approval spread through the hall. Some warriors still looked skeptical, but others nodded in respect. Jackson let out a tired laugh. Well, that was the single most stressful moment of my life. Siraxa turned to him, studying him carefully. Then, to his complete shock, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did well," she said quietly. Jackson blinked. "Wow, high praise from you." Siraxa did not answer, but there was something softer in her gaze now. The elder raised his hand once more, then let it be known. The bond is sealed. The warriors in the hall stamped their fists against their chests, a formal sign of approval. Jackson watched them, then turned back to Siraxa. "So," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "does this mean we're, officially married now?" Siraxa's lips twitched ever so slightly. "Yes, Jackson. Now, you are all mine." Jackson chuckled. He could live with that. Jackson sat on the edge of the sleek balcony, staring out at the endless stars stretching across the night sky. The air on Siraxa's homeworld was crisp and cool, carrying the faint hum of distant city lights. Below, warriors moved in formation, training under the glow of massive floating lanterns. Everything here felt larger than life. And somehow, Jackson was now part of it. He still wasn't sure how that happened. A soft footstep behind him made him glance over his shoulder. Siraxa stood there, arms crossed, studying him with that unreadable gaze of hers. "You are quiet," she said. Jackson smirked. "I just went through an alien trial by sword and got magically married. Forgive me if I need a second to process." Siraxa stepped closer. "Do you regret it?" Jackson looked back at the stars. Did he? Earth was light years away. His old life, his old problems. It all felt like a dream now. If someone had told him a month ago that he'd be standing on an alien planet, bonded to a warrior princess, he would have laughed in their face. And yet, here he was. He turned to Siraxa, searching for the right words. I don't know what happens next, but I know I don't hate it here." He let out a small laugh. "That's a start, right?" Siraxa considered this. "It is." A comfortable silence settled between them. It was strange. Just a few days ago, they had been complete strangers, thrown into this bond by duty and fate. But now things felt different. Jackson grinned. "So, since we're officially stuck with each other, I figure we should set some ground rules." Siraxa arched an eyebrow. "Rules?" "Yeah," Jackson said, leaning back against the railing. "Rule number 1. No surprise combat training at dawn. I like my ribs unbroken." Siraxa almost smiled. "Noted." "Rule number 2. If we ever go to Earth, you have to try pizza." Siraxa tilted her head. "You are still thinking about this. Pizza." "You don't understand," Jackson said seriously. "It's the single greatest food in the universe." Siraxa gave a small nod. "Then I shall try it." Jackson held out a hand. "Shake on it." Siraxa hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out and clasped his hand in hers. Her grip was strong, warm, but there was something else there too. Something gentler than before. Jackson's chest tightened. For the first time, this didn't feel like a forced arrangement. It felt like the start of something real. Siraxa studied him for a moment longer before speaking. "I believe I will add a rule of my own." Jackson smirked. "Oh yeah? Let's hear it." Siraxa stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "You will not stand alone. No matter what comes next, we face it together." Jackson blinked. Something about the way she said it, the quiet strength behind the words, made his heartbeat quicken. He gave a small nod. "Deal." As the night stretched on, they stood together under the stars, a human and a warrior, no longer just bound by duty, but by choice.